what is the current status of negotiations between the US and the UK when it comes to a trade deal? Because the UK can't actually do anything until after Brexit.
That's right. So there are two sets of activity happening here. Both are really important to our trading relationship between the UK and the US. The first and immediate priority is there is a whole host of agreements that we're part of while members of the EU that underpin our trade with the US, and indeed the US's trade with the UK. So we leave the EU, we come out of those agreements, and we have to recreate them. So what we signed yesterday was a mutual recognition agreement on...
That's a framework.
A framework, and on some quite detailed issues around conformities, but they really matter to sort of cross-border trade between the UK and US. So that was signed yesterday. A few weeks ago, there was 2 agreements signed on wines and spirits, and for example, a month or so ago, we signed an aviation agreement so that planes can keep flying between the UK and US, and there's also been, I think, something called a covered agreement on reinsurance. And they all sound quite dry and frameworky, but they're really important in terms of keeping trade flowing. Okay. On a parallel track, separate track, but that can't really take off properly until we have left the EU, is our intent, and the President and the Prime Minister's intent, to do an ambitious bilateral free trade agreement between the UK and US to take our relationship further into the future. OK,
so as you know, you've been following, I'm sure, all the latest Brexit developments out of Downing Street and out of UK Parliament. So a lot of people are fearing a no-deal Brexit. The fact that the US, or the UK rather, has a preliminary kind of sort of verbal commitment from the United States, from Donald Trump, does that ease the pressure for Theresa May? And if so, by how much?
I think the point I would really make on this is that we have an incredibly deep and meaningful trade and economic relationship between us now at the minute in terms of volumes of investment, jobs on both sides of the Atlantic that are sustained by this. And what the Prime Minister and the President have said from the very beginning, they said it together when the Prime Minister visited Donald Trump in the White House in January 2017, is that our ambition, once we have left the EU, is to do a bilateral deal that really turbocharges that relationship and takes it forward. And that's what we have been preparing to do. But we're not starting from scratch. As I say, we already have this amazing relationship that we're building on.
Right, but if you remember, I think it was about, what, 2.5 years ago, right when the referendum was happening, President Obama came out and said, listen, if the UK decides to leave the EU, they will have to go to the back of the line, the back of the queue, in terms of any kind of relationship, trading relationship with the United States. President Trump, I'm trying to put this diplomatically, but President Trump obviously doesn't have the same kind of respect for multinational agreements. And it seems as though Prime Minister May seems been able to use that to her advantage.
I think if we look forward, and actually if we go to the point you made, this is an important part of our Brexit agenda. One of the reasons for leaving the EU is to seize the opportunities of developing an independent trade policy, crucially with nations like the United States. In terms of what's been said in the past about where we are in the queue, I think I would just point to the fact that the US is an incredibly capable trade machine. It can negotiate on multiple fronts at once. But I think the positive thing, the important thing here is that the President and the Prime Minister, with this shared ambition to really do a deal as soon as we possibly can, which we can't start negotiating until we've left the EU, which is why we want to get on and leave the EU, do the withdrawal agreement, leave in a smooth and orderly way, free up the opportunity of that, protect the border in Ireland. These are all, I think, shared ambitions between the UK and the US, and that's what we're looking to deliver.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate you coming on the programme.